The mini-man with a mighty army. Yes, I know Napoleon wasn't short. The first Emperor of France. Although not that impressive when you think about the fact there was actually only 2 of them. And the man who inspired ABBA. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in Napoleon November, I am finally talking about the Corsican ogre himself. Go check out my video on his second wife, Empress Marie-Louise, for more context. This month is seeing the release of the new Napoleon film on Apple TV, directed by Ridley Scott, with the titular character being played by Joaquin Phoenix. You know, who also plays this guy. Napoleon Bonaparte, yep, that's his full name, no middle name, was born on the 15th of August 1769 to parents Carlo and Letitia. Napoleon was the second eldest out of his parents, 8 children, and his entire family would be leeching off his success his entire life. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica, an island that is like a love child between France and Italy. The French Revolution had started while Napoleon was in Corsica, and by the time he returns to France, it is in full swing. The revolution was rooted in the dysfunction of the French monarchy and its inability to fund its ambitions of being a world power. After ironically being on the winning side of the American War of Independence, the only way to reform it would be to tear down the whole thing. Napoleon had seen what happened in America. If you get rid of the monarchy, something needs to replace it, and the Americans seem to be doing okay. Now, I'm not saying that Napoleon's ambitions to be emperor started right here. They might have done, but they might not have done. But he would have been aware of Hamilton the musical. Oh no, sorry, I mean the American War of Independence. Napoleon himself would have a close encounter with death during the siege of Toulon. It would be here that he narrowly missed a cannonball and he got stabbed in the leg with a pike. Originally, it was thought that his leg would need to be amputated, but thankfully, and I'm sure Napoleon agrees, he got a second opinion and he was allowed to keep the leg.
Okay, how much for the arm?
During his time in France, Napoleon's talents were acknowledged by Maximilien Robespierre, who was a radical Jacobin leader and one of the principal figures in the French Revolution. However, Robespierre's influence over France and Napoleon would not last long, as he was arrested and then executed on the 28th of July 1794. After Robespierre's execution, those who survived the Reign of Terror, which was basically orchestrated by Robespierre, spent the next year deciding how to rebuild France. This was the issue of the revolution. They weren't planning on regicide, they just did it. And then they didn't really know what to do next. The execution of Robespierre brought in the reign of the Directory, a rival period for France and providing an opening for the political rise of none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. In October 1795, Paul de Barras, a friend of Josephine de Beauharnais, check out my video on Josephine to find out if her and de Barras were lovers, instructed a then 26-year-old Napoleon to put down a royalist uprising. They thought that a constitutional monarchy like Britain might not be such a bad idea. I mean, it's pretty good. It's lasted for quite a while. Napoleon was successful with what is known as a grape shot, which basically launched a basketball-shaped metal straight into the royalist uprisers. Napoleon was greatly rewarded for his success and was given the army of Italy to lead. After the uprising, all weapons were confiscated in Paris, which included the sabre of Viscount Alexandre de Beauharnais, who had been executed in the Reign of Terror. Alexandre's son Eugene went to Napoleon to ask for his father's sabre. You know, probably one of the few things the boy had of his father left. Napoleon agreed to give the boy his father's sabre. His mother, Josephine, was very grateful, and she went to Napoleon in person to thank him. This was the first time that Josephine and Napoleon met. A few months later, the couple wed.
That was fast.
They had only known each other for 5 months, but it was a whirlwind romance. Napoleon was smitten with Josephine. Napoleon had always been close with his family, so they weren't very impressed when he married Josephine without telling them. The Bonaparte family did not approve of Josephine, and on the 11th of March 1796, Napoleon left Paris to take command of the army of Italy. The army had 30,000 men, poor supplies, and was basically neglected. Unsurprisingly, Napoleon was going to turn this neglected army around. Napoleon trades with Austria. He gives them Venice for the territories that they were forced to give up. While he is in Milan, Napoleon stays in what is effectively a palace. He has it extended so more people can pay visits to him. Napoleon left Italy at the end of 1797, but after living like a king for the last year, he leaves it all in Italy, and when he's back in France, he presents himself as a very humble man. Mainly because he knows if he returns to France acting like he's the monarch of Italy, he would probably be thrown in prison. Napoleon leaves France again in 1798 to go on campaign in Egypt, and this would be one of Napoleon's first failures. Along with his army, he also took several dozen hundreds of scientists and their associates, who will set up the Institute of Egypt, which parallels the National Institute of Science in Paris. None of them spoke Arabic. Helpful. Or if they did, it was outdated ancient Arabic. Napoleon manipulates the Egyptians and tells them that the French occupation was a good thing. They were anti-Catholic, so they were pro-Islam, which wasn't the case. And the Napoleonic army looted and stole a lot of stuff from Egypt that they had no right to, and was an unpleasant experience for the Egyptians. Napoleon also thought that by being in Egypt he would be out of the reach of the British, but Admiral Horatio Nelson proved otherwise. The British army and his navy fleet destroyed the French fleet in the Battle of the Nile. The Egyptian campaign was ultimately a failure for the French, achieving nothing, but two key points stand out, and they are very dark. Point number 1. The Ottoman massacre that disturbed even Napoleon's contemporaries. And then you've got his healing moment. You see, plague was still rife in this part of the world in the 18th century, and there is a famous painting of Napoleon, who is painted as a Christ-like figure, touching people, healing them, trying to uphold his popularity and his reputation. Napoleon knew that Egypt was a disaster. So he jumped ship and fled back to France before anyone could report back to Paris what had happened in Egypt. He abandons his army in Egypt. He hasn't got orders to return to France, and he started to hear rumours of the goings-on in France that might open up opportunities for him. While he was in Egypt, Josephine was looking at buying Château de Malmaison. Before he had left for Egypt, Napoleon had given Josephine a budget, knowing what she was like for spending, and he let her finish the negotiations while he was away. Of course, she went over budget and bought it anyway. Her spending and running up high debts would frequently anger Napoleon. Also, while he was in Egypt, Napoleon was constantly in need of new weapons. So Josephine would use her charms to kind of like butter up the investors and agree a high price. And then she would take a cut of the profits so she can go do more shopping. Just like when he was in Italy, rumours had spread of Josephine's infidelity. This time though, Napoleon struggled, and he started to believe the rumours of his wife's affairs. When Napoleon returned to France, Josephine was aware of what was being said about her. So she went to their house, later known as Rue de la Victoire, where Napoleon was hiding, but he had locked her out. She stood outside and screamed with sadness for a day and a half, with her children Eugene and Hortense by her side. Napoleon finally softened and let them in. He had planned on getting rid of Josephine, and yet here they were, laying in bed together. At a later point in time, Napoleon will write to Josephine and tell her, "I love you as I did the day we met." If Napoleon wanted to be more than a general, he needed Josephine. She was a people pleaser and a charmer. He wasn't. Josephine also had the right connections that Napoleon needed. On the 9th of November, Napoleon, with Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès and his brother Lucien, overthrew the Directory by a coup d'etat, and a provisional consul was put in place. A month later, on the 12th of November 1799, Napoleon became the first consul of France at the age of 30. He had two other consuls who would advise him, and he found himself at the head of the French state. During the coup d'etat, Napoleon had essentially announced himself as the first consul. So, to make his position a bit more legit, he held a referendum in February 1800. The results were announced by Lucien Bonaparte. 99.9% were in favour of the new constitution, with Napoleon as the first consul. However, academics and historians believe that the Bonaparte brothers, mainly Lucien, might have massaged the figures, as to speak.
You sit on a throne of lies.
And on the 18th of May, 1804, Napoleon was made the first Emperor of France.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first
French.
empire for a safe and secure society.
Napoleon's reign so far had been fairly stable, something that France hadn't had in ages, but it was in dire need of. He and his supporters' main argument for him being emperor was that under the current government, if you got rid of Napoleon, you would be in turmoil, and there had been assassination attempts on his life. But by making him emperor, there would be a clear line of succession and would keep the country stable. So you got rid of a king to replace him with another king. Okay. Napoleon was coronated as the first Emperor of France on the 2nd of December 1804. During the ceremony, he took the crown from the Pope and crowned himself, as he was more worthy than the Pope, and then Napoleon crowned his wife, Josephine, as Empress. By having the Pope crown him, he gives the idea that he is emperor because of God's will. But Napoleon is a self-made man, so that won't really work for his image. Although the coronation nearly didn't happen, as he and Josephine had been wed in a civil ceremony, not a church wedding. And the Pope refused to be part of the service if he and Josephine didn't have a church wedding, which they did the day before. This was a ploy on Josephine's part. She knew her enemies were trying to get rid of her, and that a church wedding would make it harder for her and Napoleon to divorce. The coronation took place at Notre Dame Cathedral at Josephine's request, and Napoleon ordered his sisters to carry Josephine's train as she entered Notre Dame, which was completely humiliating as they hated Josephine as much as the rest of the Bonaparte family did. Although it was reported that Josephine beamed the day that she was crowned empress. Napoleon's victory streak kept going. In 1809, the French defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Wagram, resulting in further gains for Napoleon. During the French Revolution, nobility titles had been abolished, but Napoleon was now re-establishing a French aristocracy, and with it, handing out titles of nobility again to his loyal friends and family as his empire continued to expand. 1809 also saw the birth of Napoleon's illegitimate child with Maria Walewska, and in a Henry VIII moment realises that he's not the infertile one, and that Josephine gotta go. Napoleon publicly announces that he still loves Josephine, but he wants a divorce for the interests of France. Josephine burst into tears and was on her knees begging him not to divorce her. In the December, Napoleon ends his marriage to Josephine, and he is already on the hunt for a new wife. His first choice was Grand Duchess Anna Pavlova of Russia, the youngest sister of Tsar Alexander I. But neither Tsar nor their mother approved of the match, so Napoleon considered Princess Maria Augusta of Saxony, but thought, at 27, she's too old.
Big blonde sack of drama say what?
The French emperor settled on Archduchess Marie-Louise, the 18-year-old daughter of Emperor Francis I of Austria, head of the House of Habsburg. Napoleon and Princess Marie-Louise wed by proxy on the 11th of March 1810. Marie-Louise was the great-niece of Marie Antoinette. Empress Josephine retired to the expensive Chateau Malmaison. Despite the divorce, Napoleon and Josephine don't stop contacting each other, and weirdly, their relationship is actually better than ever. "Never doubt the sincerity of my feelings for you," writes Napoleon. "They will last as long as I live." Napoleon led a campaign against Russia, but like many of his campaigns since the divorce of Josephine, this one ends in disaster. In October 1813 was the Battle of Leipzig. Napoleon's forces were defeated again, and he retreated to France. In March 1814, the coalition, that is comprised of Austria, Prussian and Russian and Swedish troops, and British, captured Paris. Napoleon was forced to abdicate on the 4th of April 1814. Initially, he tried to abdicate in favour of his son, Napoleon, with Marie-Louise as regent, but the coalition and Alexander weren't going to accept that in case he uses it as an excuse to try and retake the throne. On the 6th of April, Napoleon was forced to announce his unconditional abdication. Napoleon abdicates as emperor on the 6th of April 1814 and flees into exile in Elba. His wife, Marie-Louise, is initially hesitant to leave. As her father was the Emperor of Austria, she believed she would be treated with kindness. But Napoleon convinces her to flee, which she does. Ironically, at this point, Josephine is actually rather friendly with the Tsar of Russia and the King of Prussia. So it does make me wonder, would it have been so disastrous if he was still married to Josephine? Would it have even got to that point if he was still married to Josephine? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Though the troops were a coalition, it would be Tsar Alexander I of Russia who would be in charge from Napoleon's abdication on the 6th of April 1814 till King Louis XVIII was installed as king on the 3rd of May 1814. On the spot where fellow monarch King Louis XVI had been executed, Tsar Alexander led the people in prayer and a Te Deum was sung. While in Paris, Alexander would visit his friend and potential lover, the Empress Josephine, and he would visit her quite frequently. The reinstation of the Bourbon family effectively marked the end of Napoleon's reign. He would return as emperor briefly, but that's essentially it. Napoleon was superstitious, and he thought that his lucky star had left when Josephine did. And he wrote loving letters to Josephine until the very end, inquiring about her health. And just in case that wasn't clear, he actually, his lucky star, his good luck charm, was Josephine. That's what he's thinking, not that she picked it up off the coffee table, put it in her pocket, and then walked off. Napoleon was given sovereignty of the small island of Elba that he was exiled on. While on Elba, he learnt about the death of his beloved Josephine, who had died from a cold that she caught. Her death caused him great sorrow. Napoleon escaped Elba on the 26th of February 1815 and sailed to France with a group of over 1,000 supporters. The King of France, King Louis XVIII, fled, and Napoleon returned as the Emperor of France on the 20th of March 1815 as what was known as the 100 days. Yet when Napoleon came back to France for those 100 days, nothing was the same. Marie-Louise was in Austria with their son. She wasn't speaking to him, and Josephine was dead. So it was Hortense who stood by her stepfather/brother-in-law like an empress. Upon Napoleon's return to France, a coalition of allies, the Austrians, British, Prussians and Russians, who considered the French emperor an enemy, began to prepare for war. Napoleon raised a new army and planned to strike preemptively, defeating the Allied forces one by one before they could launch a united attack against him.
I got a bad feeling about this.
So he started with Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were stationed. Napoleon defeated Prussian troops at the Battle of Ligny on the 16th of June 1815, and 2 days later, on the 18th of June 1815, was the Battle of Waterloo, and the French were crushed by the British, thanks to the Duke of Wellington. Napoleon was forced to abdicate again on the 22nd of June 1815. This time it was the British and the Prussians who governed France until King Louis XVIII returned to France on the 8th of July 1815. Napoleon tried to flee to America, but he was captured by the English. This time, Napoleon was exiled to St. Helena, where he died on the 5th of May 1821 at the age of 51. It is thought that he most likely died from stomach cancer. During his time in power, Napoleon is often posing with his hand in his vest, leading to some speculation after his death that he had been plagued by stomach pain for years. Napoleon was buried on the island despite his request to be laid to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people I have loved so much. In 1840, his remains were returned to France and entombed in a crypt at Les Invalides in Paris, where other French military leaders are interred. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Make sure to check out my other Napoleon content if you haven't already. And until the next one, have a wonderful day.